Section 1. Origins of a conflict, roots in history. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a complex issue with deep roots in history. It is a conflict over land, identity, and security, fueled by decades of mistrust and violence. To understand the present, we must first delve into the past, exploring the origins of this seemingly intractable struggle. The seeds of the conflict were sown in the late 19th century, with the rise of Zionism, a movement advocating for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. This land, considered holy by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, was then part of the Ottoman Empire, with a predominantly Arab population. The Zionist movement gained momentum in the early 20th century, particularly after the horrors of the Holocaust, which underscored the need for a Jewish homeland. Meanwhile, Palestinian Arabs, witnessing the influx of Jewish immigrants, grew increasingly apprehensive about their own future in their homeland. The British, who assumed control of Palestine after World War I, made promises to both sides: a Jewish homeland and protection for Arab rights, promises that proved impossible to reconcile. This set the stage for the conflict that would erupt with the end of British rule in 1948. Section 2. Wars and Treaties, Shaping the Narrative. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 marked a turning point in the conflict. The subsequent war, known as the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, or the Nakba, catastrophe to Palestinians, led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and the expansion of Israeli territory. This initial conflict set the stage for a series of wars and uprisings that would shape the region for decades to come: the 1956 Suez Crisis, the 1967 Six-Day War, which resulted in Israel's capture of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, and the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Despite periods of intense fighting, there have also been attempts at peace. The 1979 Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty, brokered by U.S. President Jimmy Carter, was a landmark achievement. It offered a glimmer of hope, demonstrating that peace between Israel and Arab states was possible. Section 3. The Present Impasse, a Gordian Knot. Today, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains one of the world's most intractable conflicts. The issues at the heart of the conflict, land, settlements, Jerusalem, refugees, security, remain unresolved, fueling a cycle of violence and mistrust. The Israeli-Palestinian peace process, launched in the 1990s with the Oslo Accords, has faltered. The two-state solution, once seen as the most viable path to peace, appears increasingly distant. The expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, deemed illegal under international law, continues, further complicating the prospects for a contiguous, viable Palestinian state. The situation in Gaza, ruled by Hamas since 2007, adds another layer of complexity. The Israeli blockade, coupled with recurring outbreaks of violence, has resulted in a dire humanitarian situation in the densely populated coastal enclave. Section 4. Global Ramifications, a World Intertwined. The ripple effects of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict extend far beyond the Middle East, impacting global politics, security, and diplomacy. The conflict features prominently in international forums, often hindering cooperation and fueling tensions. The conflict continues to be a source of division within the international community, with countries holding divergent views on the root causes of the conflict and the path to peace. This division is evident in UN resolutions, international legal opinions, and global public opinion. The conflict has also fueled extremism and terrorism, providing fertile ground for radical groups to exploit grievances and recruit followers. The unresolved grievances and the perception of injustice continue to be powerful motivators for violence. Section 5. The Future Uncertain, a Fork in the Road. The future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains uncertain. The two-state solution, once seen as the most viable path to peace, is in jeopardy. The expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, the absence of a meaningful peace process, and the lack of trust between the parties make a negotiated two-state solution increasingly elusive. The status quo, however, is unsustainable and carries significant risks. The continued occupation and the denial of Palestinian rights could lead to renewed cycles of violence. The absence of a political horizon and the lack of hope for a better future could could further fuel extremism and radicalization. The international community has a responsibility to work towards a just and lasting peace in the region. This requires a renewed commitment to diplomacy, a willingness to address the legitimate grievances of both sides, and a recognition that peace cannot be imposed but must be built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. Section 6. The Weight of History. A Shared Land Divided. Understanding the Israel-Palestine conflict requires grappling with the weight of history. Both Israelis and Palestinians lay claim to the same land, drawing upon centuries-old narratives and religious texts to support their claims. This shared history, however, is often a source of division rather than unity. For Jews, the land holds deep religious and historical significance. It is the land of their forefathers, the site of ancient kingdoms, and the place where their sacred scriptures were written. The Holocaust, which saw the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews, further cemented the desire for a Jewish homeland in the wake of unimaginable suffering. For Palestinians, the land is their ancestral home, passed down through generations. Their narrative speaks of dispossession, displacement, and the struggle to maintain their national identity in the face of occupation. The events of 1948, known as the Nakba or catastrophe, are central to the Palestinian narrative, representing a time of immense loss and trauma. The Israel-Palestine conflict is not simply a bilateral issue. It is deeply intertwined with regional and global dynamics. External actors driven by their strategic interests, historical ties, and ideological commitments have played a significant role in shaping the conflict's trajectory. The United States, as Israel's closest ally, has been a key player in the peace process, often serving as a mediator and provider of financial and military aid to Israel. However, the U.S.'s unwavering support for Israel, at times at the expense of Palestinian concerns, has drawn criticism and fueled accusations of bias. Arab states, particularly neighboring Jordan and Egypt, have also been deeply involved in the conflict. While Jordan and Egypt have signed peace treaties with Israel, the plight of the Palestinians remains a sensitive issue, shaping their foreign policy positions and influencing public opinion. The pursuit of peace in the Israel-Palestine conflict has been marked by both glimmers of hope and crushing disappointments. From the early days of the conflict, numerous attempts have been made to broker peace agreements, bringing together Israeli and Palestinian leaders, with varying degrees of international support. The Oslo Accords, signed in the 1990s, represented a watershed moment, offering a roadmap for a two-state solution and raising hopes for a lasting peace. The accords led to the establishment of the Palestinian Authority and a framework for negotiations on final status issues. However, the Oslo process ultimately faltered, hampered by a lack of trust, escalating violence, and the expansion of Israeli settlements. Subsequent peace efforts, including the Camp David Summit in 2000 and the Annapolis Conference in 2007, failed to bridge the divides. The collapse of these initiatives led to further disillusionment and a hardening of positions on both sides, making the prospect of a negotiated settlement seem increasingly distant. Beyond the political complexities and geopolitical calculations, the Israel-Palestine conflict is, at its core, a human tragedy. Generations of Israelis and Palestinians have grown up in the shadow of this conflict, their lives shaped by violence, fear, and mistrust. On the Palestinian side, the conflict has resulted in displacement, dispossession, and a lack of basic freedoms. The expansion of Israeli settlements, the security barrier, and the checkpoints have fragmented Palestinian land and restricted movement, impacting livelihoods and daily life. On the Israeli side, the conflict has brought terrorism, war, and a constant sense of insecurity. The fear of rocket attacks, suicide bombings, and other forms of violence is a constant reality for many Israelis, shaping their perceptions and impacting their daily lives. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a complex and enduring struggle, defying easy solutions. The path forward remains uncertain, with the two-state solution, once seen as the most viable option, hanging by a thread. The status quo, however, is unsustainable, characterized by recurring cycles of violence, deepening mistrust, and a diminishing hope for a better future. Resolving this conflict requires a fundamental shift in mindsets, a willingness to acknowledge the narratives and grievances of both sides, and a commitment to finding a just and lasting solution. The international community has a moral and strategic imperative to support a renewed peace process, one based on international law, mutual respect, and a recognition of the shared humanity of both Israelis and Palestinians. Ultimately, peace will not be achieved through military might or unilateral actions. It will require courageous leadership, difficult compromises, and a shared vision of a future where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace, security, and dignity. The road ahead will be long and arduous, but the pursuit of peace, however elusive, remains the only path towards a brighter future for both peoples.